Thanks for showing up in such great numbers. It's a great honor that you all came here to listen to what I have to say about the Blue Revolution, a perspective for human development in the 21st century. First, the outline of the lecture, as you can see it here. I begin with an introduction, some general rules about this lecture. Pretty much everything is allowed here. If you want to Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, that's fine with me, as long as you don't disturb other people. So please make sure that the sound of your mobile device is switched off. Also, since I lived for some time in Japan, I also learned to accept that people sleep during lectures. That's also accepted. As long as you don't make any noise and disturb other people, that's also fine. There is room for questions at the end of my lecture, but if you really have the idea that you don't really understand something and you're not going to understand anything of my lecture unless you ask a question, please do so. That's also allowed. What's not allowed is to use that opportunity to give your own mini lecture, as often happens. That's not allowed today. Sorry. So that's about the rules of today. I also have a small family moment in my introduction, and I have to admit to you that usually I'm not such a big fan of that. I know that's expected in the Facebook era, that you tell something about yourself and about your private life. And usually I feel much more comfortable in just talking about water management and building and construction. But today I'm going to still do that. I will say a little bit about my family for two reasons. The first reason is that a big part of my family is here today. And I think that's a very important reason, because that doesn't happen that often, that they are here. The last time when they all showed up at the lecture was during my PhD defense at Delft University. And that was a very strict ceremony. Whereas today I have 1 hour that I completely do the things that I like. So that's a huge opportunity for me. But the second reason, I think equally important, is that I think that there are some things about the history of my family that is relevant also to the story that I'm about to share with you today. Some observation about thinking about the future, then I will give a problem overview, what's happening in delta areas today in the world. And then that might depress you a little bit if I explain about the problems. But I promise you that I will also give some perspective about how we're going to solve those issues, so that we can still leave in a positive way from this lecture. In Rotterdam, this is a University of Applied Science, so we're not satisfied if we only develop new knowledge on paper. We also want to implement things. And that applies for hogescholen or universities of applied sciences. What's the translation in English? That applies in general, but you can imagine that that's also something of the city of Rotterdam. People from Rotterdam, they like to do things. Talking is fine, but it should lead to something. So you can imagine that a University of Applied Sciences from Rotterdam, implementation is very important. So that's what I will also talk about. And then I end with the conclusion. So let me start with a small family moment. But before I do that, let me ask a question to you. Who knows something about the history of this place, the RDM, where we are right now? Can you raise your hands, please? Yes? So what was the main activity that happened here in the years after the war? Who knows that? Submarines, yes. Other activities? Shipbuilding, yes. Ship repair, yeah. So, and this is a picture from the 1960s. And really famous ships were built here, such as the Rotterdam. And I invite you to have a look at the RDM website, where you can read a lot about the history of this place. And many famous ships were built here, but also ship maintenance. Those kind of things also happened here. And it was in this time that, maybe for most of you, not such a famous ship was here. It was in 1966. And there was a ship called the Openbare. It was doing some small repairs here. And a young man came here in August 1966 to board on his first journey with this ship, with the Openbare. And he came here. And this is a picture from that time, and this is not me. This is my father. My father left from this place in 1996 on his first journey. He was 90 years old here. This is from 1967. You can see that he still has to earn all his stripes. He did that in the 10 years after that. And he traveled all over the world. And What did that bring to me? Of course, that from a very young age I learned about cities all over the world in delta areas. And that was quite important. And if you want to know what happened in the 60s on the big ships, there are really spectacular stories about that. I invite you to go talking with my father during the drinks. And I'm sure that he wants to tell you a little bit about that. So that's one part of the family. Now we go to the other part of the family of my mother. And this is about the same time, I think it's a couple of years earlier, but it's also the 1960s. This is not the port of Rotterdam, but this is the port of Scheveningen. It's really forbidden with so many people of my family to call that The Hague here. It's Scheveningen. And what you can see here is the quality of picture is not so good, but actually there are people on this picture that are here. The woman that's standing there is my grandmother. The girl that's laughing and paying zero attention to the cameraman is my mother. And the very small girl that's standing there is my aunt that also is here today. So at the background you see this ship. And my grandfather, although I don't have memories to him, but I heard a lot of stories about him, was quite a visionary man. Because already in the 1960s he saw the potential of water recreation. And he had this great idea, wouldn't it be fun to buy a ship that's used in the Westland area to transport vegetables and convert that into a recreational home. And many people in his direct surroundings thought that was a crazy idea and what was he doing there with this ship. But actually he did that, so single-handedly with help of his brother, he converted this boat with an engine and all the modern equipment that you could think of in that time. And he installed that in this ship. And the family had a great time going in very beautiful places in the Netherlands. The Nieuwkoopse Plassen, many other places, and to have holidays there. And even when I was a child, I have also been on this boat. Although the memories are not so clear, because I was very young. But I can still remember being at this boat, in the Nieuwkoopse Plassen, for instance. As you can see in Dutch, it says the start of the beginning of living on the water. And this picture was given to me by the brother of my grandfather when I defended my PhD in Delft University 3 years ago. And it's never that I thought, my father, he went at the RDM. I only found it out last year. But these are the things, when you look back, it makes sense. I never thought, my grandfather made ships and let's also go work on living on the water. No, but at the end it makes sense if you look back. And that's also what... So, now that you know something about my family, we can start, I think. And I can tell you much more about it from the previous generation, but I'm not going to do that. That would take because they were also all into shipping and fishing and doing stuff on the water. But I will not go into detail with that. But in general, what I think the background for my family gave me an open mind. And I think, and I'm also quite fascinated about the future. And I can give you many examples where people made wrong predictions about the future. People in the beginning of the 20th century said that, cars were only a novelty and that the horse was here to stay. People even in the 1970s that said that the computer, there's no reason why anyone would like to have a computer in his home. And why are we often wrong when we talk about the future? Why do we often completely see it the wrong way? And I think that it's because we see the situation as it is now and we consider the solutions and the problem that we're facing in the context of the situation as it is now. Whereas in reality, things are always changing. And although I don't have a classical background that ends with about 2 years of Latin at high school, I've always been quite fascinated by this quote of Greek philosopher Heraclitus that says, "You could not step twice into the same river, for other waters are ever flowing onto you." And that actually means that things are always changing, and that the static situation that we consider today could not be the starting point for either analyzing the problems or looking at solutions. And if you look at biology, it's not the strongest or the fastest or the largest species that are most successful. The most adaptive species are the ones that are most successful. And I would say that the same applies to cities. It's not the strongest or the richest city or the one with the most high-rise buildings that will be most successful in the 21st century. I think it will be the most adaptive cities that will be most successful. And that's what my profession is about, basically. How are we going to make cities to be adaptive, both on the land and on the water? Today I will mainly talk about the water. First, I'm going to depress you a little bit by showing some problems. And afterwards, we're going to talk about solutions. So let's have a look at this global city light image. It's an indicator both of where people live, but also where the economic activity are. Take a look at North Korea, for instance, at this map. What you can see already from this picture is that most of that economic activity and most of the population is located along the coast. And I have a pointer with me that I can show it a little bit to you. So a lot of population, economic activity located along the coast. And today, about 30% of the human population lives within 100 kilometers from the coast. And that number will rise to about 50% of the human population already in 2030. Who knows why we do that? Why do we all go to the coast where we know that it's very dangerous? Who has an idea about that?
It's for economic reasons.
Economic reasons, yes. People are looking for a job. Where are the cities? Well, they are located along the coast. Who can mention one single city, a really large city, that's not located along the coast or in a river plain? Beijing, yes. Yeah. Sao Paulo, yes. Mexico City, yeah. That's basically those are the three. But the rest is all located along the coast or in river plains. So, and even Beijing, it's not located along the coast, but it's also kind of a plain where it's located. So that's the challenge we're dealing with. And if we, just to share some numbers with you, 3.5 billion people are living in cities today. That number will rise with about 4.5 to 5 billion people until 2100. And that means that every single day, 150,000 people move to cities. Still numbers, what does it mean? Manila, the Philippines. Look at what happened here in the last 35 years. 1975, that might be the time that my father, I'm not sure, did you go to Manila or with a ship once? Once, okay. Well, then it looked a little bit like this. But now it looks like this. So it's a very rapid urbanization process. So where can people go? They all go to the city and they end up in vulnerable floodplains. There's no other option than to live far away from the city center, far away from jobs in the floodplains. The government tried to get people out of the floodplains. What happens? Bulldozers. It doesn't go in a very gentle way, I can tell you. People are removed from the floodplains. Where are people going to live? Even further from the city center. So guess what people are going to do? They go back. And these are the real challenges that we need to face. And I now take Manila because we're doing research there and we're working together with my colleague Rick Heikoop. We're trying to establish a climate adaptation center there. And there's high-level interest for that. In the next month, ministers from the Philippines will visit us to talk about this plan. And we will start developing a climate adaptation center to really assist with our knowledge there to adapt to the challenges cities like this are facing. But the same happens in Jakarta, the same happens in Ho Chi Minh City and many other cities in delta areas all over the world. Natural weather catastrophes. You see a rise of flooding, other natural catastrophes that are happening. Partly because of climate change, but mostly because people are living in very vulnerable floodplains. Sandy, of course, you all know what happened last week. And it demonstrates again the vulnerability of large delta cities. Even if they're quite rich, they're still very vulnerable. Population exposed to flooding right now and in 2070, a study by the OECD. You can see in the light blue here, you see the number of people that are exposed to flooding now, or at least in 2007 when this study was published. And you see in dark blue and red the number of people that will be added to that. Dark blue because of socio-economic change, such as land use change or urbanization. And the red because of climate change and subsidence. And you can see that in particular in Asia, there's a huge challenge of protecting people against the impacts of flooding. The effects of land subsidence. This is a picture from Jakarta, Indonesia, taken by my fellow professor Piet Deerke, who does a lot of work there and also tries to really contribute with the Dutch knowledge to deal with these challenges. So this is not during a flood or during high water. The sea water is permanently here and the city is permanently there. So it's only protected by a very small wall and the land subsides with a very rapid rate in Jakarta, Indonesia. Who knows why that is? Why does land subsidence take place? One of the students who has an idea? Yes?
Water extraction from the soil.
Exactly, yes. That's one of the most important reasons. So in Jakarta, Indonesia, There's a lot of extraction of groundwater for industrial purposes mainly. Well, and if that happens, the pore pressure in the soil increases, so that leads to land subsidence. And also another reason that happens often in delta areas is the construction of dikes prevents. So in a natural river system, every year with the floods, there's sediments added to the land. As soon as you build a dike, that process stops, and the land starts to subside, whereas the sediments are no longer disposed in the floodplains, but only between the dikes. And that's the reason why in the Netherlands, one of the reasons why in the Netherlands we live below the sea level. But that's no longer a Dutch problem. In many areas all over the world, we have cities or areas that are located below the sea level. So this, of course, we deal with it for already a long time here in Holland, but more and more areas face the same problem. So that's about the flood issues in delta areas. For who of you is this a new story? Who says, well, this is really something new, I didn't know that, this is really something new for me? All right, so I have something to do. I make sure that the rest of my story is new to you. Of course, I'm sure we know all this, but I think that the skill and the speed of what this is happening is quite something that we really need to realize. Another issue that I want to share with you, that's I think probably a little bit more novel to you, is the issue of land scarcity. And what we did, we investigated the land shortage in the world. And in the left bar, you see all the land that we have available on the planet. It's quite a simple graph, but I can assure you to make such a graph, it's quite a lot of work. It was not only done by me, but also mainly by my colleagues of DeltaSync. So you can see here, that part of that is polar, part is desert, part is forest, small part is urban, more and more is used for fuel crops, and then a part of it is for agriculture. And we evaluated what's going to happen if we just continue with the business as usual, taking into account a 50% more efficient agricultural production, what would happen in 2050, and how much space we are lacking at that moment. We found that our estimated land shortage is 22 million square kilometers. It's a number. What does it mean? To give you an idea, that's more than 2 times China. Quite a big country. 2 times China that we're lacking on land surface in 2050. And well, still it's abstract. What does it mean that we lack 22 million square kilometers? Well, that scarcity will be paid in rising food prices and rising prices of biofuel and energy. By whom will it be paid? In particular by people that cannot afford it. Don't have the money to spend more money on food. And we already see the first indicators of that already today. Food riots taking place more and more all over the world. Rising food prices and rising energy prices. And more of that area is taken up by fuel crops. That does not yet even take into account the fact that we also, some of us, would also like to keep our CO2 levels a little bit constant. So if we also take into account the fact that we need land to capture the CO2, we already lack half a planet today. How do we pay for half a planet? By using the fossil fuels and by allowing a rise of CO2 levels. And you can see that in 2050 it doesn't even fit on my slide. I'm not a business as usual person. I really don't like business as usual. I think it's rather boring and usually not such a good idea. So of course we can do something, right, to prevent this from happening or see what kind of technologies do we have available. So what we studied is the best practices that are available to do something against this problem. So we developed the best case scenario. So what if we really develop new types of agriculture? We increase the agricultural production with 75%. What if we all eat 25% less meat? What if we produce 25% less weight and reduce our carbon emissions with 80%? I'm very much in favor of all of these measures. Still, we lack 12 million square kilometers. What does it mean? India and Brazil take it together. And whereas I'm an optimistic person, there's no really hard proof or even an indication that we're going in that direction. Actually, the agricultural production is declining already for decades. There's no indication that we're going to make the 75%. Meat consumption is actually increasing in most of the countries. We produce more waste and we produce even more carbon. So although I think that current land-based cities should transform into cities that do this, at this moment there's no indication that that's going to happen. So even then, we still lack a huge amount of space. And then the question is, how are we going to deal with that? Where can we go? Can we go to the desert? No. The water resources to make the desert productive are lacking. Already now we need all the rainwater runoff, for instance, in India and China. And so we don't have more water resources available to make the desert productive. And please remember that part of the best case scenario already includes using parts of the desert in a productive way. All right, so then, can we go to space? Well, I have to say, last week, I don't know if you have seen that in the newspapers, but actually there was a student that purchased for the first time a space journey for 70,000 euros. I don't know where he got the money from as a student. I didn't have that as a student, but for sure he did it. So it's becoming cheaper. But I think to deal with this problem, to locate 12 million square kilometers in space, I'm quite convinced that eventually we are going to do it. Perhaps that sounds like a crazy idea, but I think humanity will go to space. We have to. The Earth is ending at a certain time, so we have to go into space. But I don't think that will happen in the next 50 years. I could be wrong, of course. So I think a better option is the ocean. 70% of our planet. Of course, I know that the ocean is also a harsh place. I know that because of my family history. But it's a big place. There's a lot of space there. So we might actually use it in a very productive way. And try to see if we can use it in a much more effective way than we do today. And since today is the election day in the United States, I tried to find a quote from the United States that's a little bit has to do something with it. And this is a quote of John F. Kennedy, who said that we are tied to the ocean, and when we go back to the sea, whether it's to sail or to watch, we are going back from whence we came. And I think he was right with that quote, and I think it's quite inspirational. Although I think he's a little bit cautious with only talking about sailing or watching. So I think we can do much more there. Produce food and create cities on the sea. Of course, the idea to create floating cities is not new. It's already described in 1895 by Jules Verne in his book Île à Hélice. Very nice book. If your French is not so good, as is the case with me. There's also a very good Dutch translation. It's great. It's a constructed island by steel pontoons with a large layer of soil on it. And this city, this is an island that travels around in the great ocean. And really, there's no bad weather because they continuously only travel in the areas where there's nice weather. Such a nice city. And it's a really nice book to read. Still quite some visionary things in it. And well thought of, even at that time. So that was already then. And more recently, the American visionary and architect Richard Buckminster Fuller, already in 1966, the year when my father left here from RDM campus, he designed for the Bay of Tokyo this very compact floating city. And he really proved the technical feasibility and also the economic feasibility. For political reasons, it didn't materialize. And if you look at it today, it's still, it looks like it could have been made yesterday. At least to my opinion. Even more recently, we had Walt Disney, who had a great idea in 1984. And he also included floating food production. So also that's not a new idea. Walt Disney came with this idea of creating floating cities and floating food production with the robots that were harvesting the food for the floating city. Also not new. And then even more recently, you had the Shimizu Corporation from Japan with the green floats. Floating skyscrapers on the ocean that use the ocean energy and with great green areas and forests around it. So I think floating cities, many people have thought of it already. So why is it interesting today? I think the relevance of floating cities is today. And to demonstrate that, I want to show you the next picture. So remember, this is the same slide I've shown you before, the land scarcity. But what if we include the blue? It doesn't even fit on my slide. And we think that on the water, and we also did some calculations on that, and really took a detailed look into the existing technologies and the documented literature, we think that on the water we can be 50 times as efficient. Why? For instance, by producing biofuels from algae, it's much more efficient than the sugarcane that we now use. Intensive aquaculture, breeding of fish, is much more efficient than letting cows run over a very big field and feed them with all sorts of other agricultural products that you also need space for. But most importantly, it's more efficient because we use the waste products of the land-based cities. So at this moment, land-based cities, they throw all their nutrients and the CO2, they dispose it to the surroundings. And we are going to use it in a very productive way and produce food and biofuel from that, from those waste products. And we're not talking about conservation, we're not talking about mitigating the problem, no. Look, 1/3 of the agricultural area becomes available for nature. We're not talking about protecting nature. We can convert 1/3 of the agricultural area on the land into nature back again. So it's really a different perception of a solution. It's not really mitigating, it's fundamentally looking at new solutions to really change the problem and really do something about it. So this is what it could look like. A floating city really in collaboration with the land-based city. It's not an isolated thing. The waste products that are produced here, the CO2, the nutrients, are used here. In floating algae farms, fish breeding, artificial reefs and wetlands around it to protect the city from waves. And by doing that, we really create a collaboration. So in a very simple scheme, a conventional city looks like this. Conventional city, you see it right here. It imports fossil fuels and a lot of food, and it produces nutrients, mainly nitrates and phosphates, and CO2. And it just disposes all of that to the river, to the atmosphere, and well, that's no longer possible. So what I propose here is a cyclical metabolism, where the floating city is going to use all that waste products to create food, to create biofuel, and to produce food, and to supply that back to the city. So it's really a collaboration between the land cities and the water cities. Why not do exactly the same thing on land? People often ask me at presentations like this. We don't have the space, basically, and we don't have the water. Remember, even in the best case scenario, we have 12 million square kilometers lacking. So we really need also to use the water. So this is another scheme, what it looks like. So what we're going to do, we use the wastewater treatment, all the nutrients from the wastewater treatments to grow algae and fish. We're going to use the CO2 from the cities and supply back food and biofuel and produce organic fertilizer for agriculture on the land. So it also contributes to agriculture on the land. I'm not proposing that we all are going to eat algae and fish, no. We also keep the agriculture on the land. It's a collaboration between the two. And remember that our current intensive agriculture really depends on fossil fuels first, but also on rock phosphate. And rock phosphate is a finite resource. It will be depleted. Some people say within 30 years, others say within 100 years, but it will be depleted. So we need to find other solutions for the nutrients for agriculture also on the land. And I think this can provide such a solution. So that's all ideas. Let's talk about some numbers. This is a hypothetical city, 4 million people on the land and 1 million people on the city. So, who of you would live in the city on the land? Nobody. Who would live? Then it's not going to work. So, okay, who of you is going to live in the city on the sea? You don't have to be polite. If you just think it's a crappy idea, just say that you live on the... Okay, that's more than I expected, really. Because usually, 1 or 2 hands go up and they say, and then I'm standing like, okay, I didn't explain it. But anyway, I think there will be people living on the sea. But in this case, 4 million people on the land, 1 million people on the sea, and together they produce 70 gigagrams of nutrients each year. So what can we do with these nutrients? Okay, so we're going to produce 425 million kilograms of algae a year, which can be used to produce 8.5 petajoules of biofuel a year, still a number, but it's 8.5% of the total oil demand of the combined system. 127 million kilograms of fish every year, and 850 million kilograms of crops every year. 21%, 55%. So it's a significant amount that we can produce with this system. Not everything, but that's also not what I'm proposing. I'm not proposed to abandon completely land-based agriculture. So the global potential of this is that 44% of the world food demand can be met by using all the available waste nutrients and CO2 from current cities. And to do that, we would need a floating area the size of Madagascar. That would be enough. And in this optimal ratio, 13% of the population would live in floating cities. Well, that's easily achieved here. We had more than 13% here. But to give you an idea, there was a survey in the Netherlands, and they asked people, would you like to live on the water? And 30% of the Dutch population considers living on the water a serious option. Now, I think that this number is a little bit higher in the Netherlands than in other countries. I'm quite convinced of that. But it's still, I think, quite a convincing number that many people are open to that. And if you would have asked in the beginning of the 80s who would like to have a mobile telephone, maybe 1-2 people would have raised their hand. So I'm quite happy that you all, thanks, that you all want to live in a floating city. It makes, it means I'm still in the right business. Okay, this is the global potential. And this is a picture of what it could look like. So really using all the waste streams of the land-based cities in floating cities like this. And of course, this is still a picture, and I can imagine that you have many questions. Is it really possible? Can it be done? Is this not only something about the future? Many other feasibility questions. Well, and I want to show you some pictures to convince you that many of the building blocks are already available. For instance, we already know how to build floating platforms. This is a construction picture of the floating pavilion that was made here, next to the RDM campus. So we have the technology to do that, make floating platforms. We know how to make floating buildings. It's not something science fiction. Already many have been made already. Floating biofuel production is not some crazy science fiction idea. Organizations like the NASA are already working on it, right? Which means that it's quite serious. There is a really proven technology to do that. And of course, still needs to be improved further, but it's done already. Floating food production is already done, also in combination with breeding fish. So the combination of producing fish with vegetables, both in sweet water, freshwater and saltwater systems, it's already done. Wave protection, well, we are very good at that in the Netherlands. Here's the Tweede Maasvlakte. Why not use the same ideas to protect floating cities? We have the technology, we have the knowledge, we're doing it all over the world, in Dubai, but also here in the Netherlands. We can use that same ideas, that same expertise in a different way. But also, of course, floating wave protection. This is a floating wave protection made by Dutch firm FDN Engineering. And similar floating wave protections were already made in the Mediterranean Sea. So that's also possible. We have these building blocks already. Artificial reefs, these are some pictures from New Orleans. Artificial reefs to create habitat for wildlife, for fish, but also to protect cities. Proven technology. Floating wetlands, American companies that are already doing it to treat wastewater, to protect cities from waves. So all these elements are already there. People have thought of it already. The building blocks are there. Utility units and infrastructure, something that I worked on together with my colleagues. Floating roads, integrated in them, floating wastewater treatment and drinking water production. All on-the-shelf technologies that can be applied. But of course, if everything would have been there, I would not stand here. I would be outside building floating cities. So of course, there's much research to be done. But the research is mainly, and this is the research agenda that we will do in the following years together with other research institutions, other universities, companies, government agencies, all sorts of different stakeholders that are interested in this. The main knowledge gap is how to integrate all these technologies and scale it up from a house level to a neighborhood level. And integrate these floating aquaculture innovations into these floating neighborhoods. That's the main knowledge gap. That's what we need to work on in the coming years. But also the urban design of floating cities. There's not really such a thing as urban design on the water. Usually people copy something from the land to the water, or they make a kind of futuristic picture. But really, how public space works on the water, we're only beginning to develop those kind of concepts. And of course, realizing how are we going to realize it, new economic models, what kind of area development models can you apply, methods of collaboration. We all need innovations on that as well, economic innovation. We need to get a better understanding on the water quality and ecological impacts of floating urbanization. And we're studying it already in Delft, but also in other places, the impact on water quality and ecology. They are still poorly understood, and we want to know, can we also use floating urbanization to improve the water quality and ecology? I think we can, but research has to show it. How can we make Rotterdam into a showcase? How can we use Rotterdam as a living lab where all delta areas from all over the world come to see how we adapt to the effects of climate change? And the role of showcases in the development and transition processes of water cities is also very important. And my colleague Leander Ernst is doing his PhD on this topic. So it's very serious and a very important issue that needs to be studied as well. So this is a research agenda that we want to work on. If there are things that you are interested in, we very much welcome collaboration. We need all the help we can get, and this thing will only succeed if we do it together. So it's not my personal thing, it's not a Rotterdam thing, it's not even a Dutch thing, but it's a global thing. And I think we need all the intelligence and creativity to really make this happen. And now I will talk with you about implementation. I developed many ideas in the past 7 years and also before that time. And most of them were not executed. But there are 2 projects where I worked on that actually made it from the paper to reality. And of course, that's the best thing. It's nice to study, it's nice to do research, it's great to make beautiful pictures and come up with these inspiring visions. But in the end, you want to go outside with your boots and your helmet and really have a look at what's happening there. And that's really why you do it. That's the main motivation of most engineers, I think. So how do we get from this vision now to that we're outside and actually doing things? Part of my PhD was about this topic, but now also I've done some action research in the past year, so I think I can share with you some ideas that I have which can assist in doing it. So both projects, many people thought it was completely crazy. And in the beginning, when we started with this, many people said, you know, this is not going to happen. You're completely out of your mind. And I thought you were intelligent people, but this is really crazy. And I always took some courage from this quote of Albert Einstein, who said that if an idea at first is not absurd, there's no hope for it. And actually, you know, if everyone accepts your ideas at once, you really have to doubt if you're doing a good job, because it might be very much mainstream in-the-box thinking. You know, if everyone thinks that's a great idea, we need to do it, probably it's not so innovative. So it's actually great if some people say that it's crazy, and you know, because that means you're really innovative. 6 years ago, I worked with students. We made a step from a vision to a mission, and our mission was to develop the first floating city in the world. And that was really the mission, what would later become DeltaSync. And I think that's quite important, to have a very good mission. You can have a vision, but you also need to know what you're going to do. And then you need to define a short-term step. And still, when we come up with this idea, still people said, you know, this is really not going to happen. We made this design together with another architecture firm, and people still thought that it was completely crazy. But then it happened. You see here the building process. This is on the first day of the construction, polystyrene blocks being glued together. Here you see a really nice combination of polystyrene and concrete beams, which together make a very light and strong foundation. Here the steel domes are placed on top of it. Inflatable cushions are installed at only 1% of the weight of glass. And at the end, this was the result, as you can see. And it's near the Erasmus Bridge. I invite you all to have a look at it once, because it's quite interesting. It moves up and down with the tide every day, and it can be moved to another location, which is one of the main benefits of floating urbanization, is that you don't have to demolish a building, but you can move it to another location. So I think that's very, very important. So what were the main lessons? Why did this happen? This building was designed and built in only 1 year, which at least for Dutch standards is very fast. Why did this materialize? There were a number of factors, I think, that contributed to that success. The first one was political importance. We were lucky that the board of Rotterdam, in particular the mayor Ivo Opstelten, supported this idea already in a very early stage. He really liked this idea to develop a floating building in Rotterdam. And that really was very important. Collaboration is very important. You cannot do projects like this just on your own. And that's why I also stress so much the importance of collaboration here, because in the end, about 30 or 40 organizations, they worked on this. And without them, it would not have happened. So it's success of many, many people. The fact that Rotterdam wanted to realize this building during the Shanghai World Expo created a huge time pressure, which made things possible. Also, we applied a process approach versus a blueprint. I will come back to that later because I think it's an important point. But it means that you should not develop your idea in all details and then ask the world to adapt to that, but your design should be adaptable to the world. And then you have a better chance that it will be implemented. We were lucky to find a network of change agents, people in different organizations with an open mind and an innovative approach. The great ambition of Rotterdam to become the leading city in climate adaptation also helped really much. And the fact that it was a temporary building so that it can be moved to another location also helped in realizing this project very fast. Then the other project that's now happening. It's the Harnaspolder in Delft. It's only 6 houses, so it's not yet a floating city. You can doubt if it's even a floating neighborhood, but it's a start in the right direction. These are 6 water plots, and 3 years ago, the municipality of Delft came to us and they said, we want to sell 6 water plots to people, which to some people thought that was a crazy idea. You're going to sell water? Do I become an owner of a piece of water? What do you mean? That's not possible. You cannot become an owner of a piece of water. And they asked us to calculate what that water, the price of it, what it would be, and how you could make different plots of that water, and all sorts of advice. We did that. But I learned a couple of lessons in this project. One of it is that it's possible to sell water. So in this case, the municipality of Delft sold water to people, and that's possible. So you can become an owner of a piece of water. If you think, why would I do that? Why would I pay for a piece of water? If you buy a piece of land, you dig a small hole, you also see water. So in the Netherlands, you're buying water anyway. So even if you think you buy land, you buy water. It's only what comes first. Okay, so that's not really innovative. Yeah, maybe innovative thinking, but it's not in innovation. But my main lesson, what I learned, was the potential of people. It's really disappointing how much influence we have as citizens in society nowadays. Basically, the only thing we can do is vote once in 4 years. Well, over the last decade, a little bit more often. And we can go shopping, So basically, the only things that we are passive voters and passive consumers. Whereas what I experienced in this project is that people can do much more. They can design their own living environment. They can design their own house. They can think about water management and energy. And this is a potential of society that's not yet fully utilized that's what I'm convinced of. And of course, you're completely right if you say that not everyone is capable of doing that. That's all true. But I think a large proportion of our population, we're better educated than ever before. We have better access to knowledge than ever before. And so we can do much more than ever before. And I think we face so much problems now with the government having a big struggle to do all the tasks that we should better use the potential of people. And that's what I learned here. So this is not really my success story. I helped a little bit, in getting the permits and, trying to convince the utility company to connect this and that kind of things. That's what I did in this project, which was hard enough, I can tell you. But people did it. And for an engineer working with real people, non-expert is already a challenge in itself. Many people are quite scared to do that. What, real citizens do have to work with that? No, you must be kidding. No, but really, I think, and that was really a great experience for me to do that. So this is only 1.5 week ago. It's happening now. In the middle of a big economic crisis, there are being six floating houses being made in the municipality of Delft. Again, quite a simple system. This is a concrete box with polystyrene around it, and you can build a house on it. And people, they design their own dream house. So it is possible. But it's always, of course, if you do something in an innovative way, it's always more difficult, for sure. So what about Rotterdam? I want to talk to you about Rotterdam. What ambitions of Rotterdam are very, very big. This is an aerial picture of Rotterdam. We are now somewhere here. This is the old center. This is the new port area, the Tweede Maasvlakte. It's not yet on this picture, I think, but it will be there somewhere. So what's happening in Rotterdam, but in many port cities, is that the industrial activity and the port activity moves further to the sea. For the ships are getting larger and you need bigger ports and that kind of process. So which leaves in the future this part of the ports will become vacant, and it can be used for all sorts of economic development, including floating urbanization. And this is the real municipal policy. Which ports will be designated already in the near future or the little bit longer term for floating urbanization. So this is official policy. And these are all the harbors where floating urbanization is going to happen in the next decades, with the ambition to create hundreds of floating houses in the near future. So it's really anchored in the official policy. And many cities from all over the world come here to see how that works, how they do it, and to learn from that approach. This is a project of where there's, I talked about the blueprint approach, that's not feasible. And this is really the flexible approach. This is the floating pavilion, it is right here. And this is only one of the many different configurations that are possible in the area around the floating pavilion. So what we do in the project Stad op het Water, it's a collaboration with the Hogeschool in Holland. What we did here was to develop many different configurations and a toolbox. And this toolbox enables people to discuss what they want and where they want it, but also to add pieces to the toolbox. So you're not coming with a blueprint approach that this is what's going to be, people will resist that. But you say, no, this is my framework, you can add things to that. If you want something here, you can start the discussion and the conversation. And I think if you're talking about the role of design, the changing role of design, I think that's the role of design. Inspiring people and starting the debate rather than giving the blueprint. And this really allows you to change, to learn. It really makes it necessary no longer to demolish buildings if you want something else, but you can change it to another location. So this very dynamic urban way of development is what we try to build here, developing the building blocks. And this is getting quite serious. It's one of the projects that's also connecting now to the top sector water for a joint industry project. The founder of this project is also here today, who developed also much of the vision behind this, Peter Lems. And it's also really a testing ground and a living laboratory to develop the building blocks of the floating city. And these are just only four examples of the many examples that were developed. So a floating city is more than only housing, of course. You need many different functions, like flexible office space, like utility islands, underwater restaurants, but also parks and public space. It's very important. All of those elements should be developed to create a floating city in the future. And that's what we're working on right now. And we need help to do that. We need companies to work with us, students to do graduation projects on this. So there's a lot of work to be done. And if you find this inspiring, you can always come and talk to me about it. And it doesn't really matter what your background is, because whatever your background, I can always find a link to the floating city. That's quite easy. All right, so which brings me back from where we started. I started at the RDM campus, and that's where I'm going to end with this project, RDM Aquadoc. This is, if you walk out, when you leave here, this building, we're now right here, you walk out, this is now an empty space of water, but this will become a living lab underwater, a demonstration area where companies, together with research and education institutes, are going to develop all sorts of projects to test floating urbanization, floating greenhouses, floating office space, all sorts of floating innovations. Sustainable energy will be tested and developed here, and from there further exported all over the world. And we work together in a community of practice with a couple of companies to make that happen. Also on a national level there is the platform Drijvend Bouwen, a platform that aims really to accelerate floating urbanization. So that's what really going to happen in the near future. And that's very important, of course, to have a place where you can really test things. It's quite unique that we have that facility here, that you really have to, you can test innovations on the water. It's unique. So this is probably not how it's going to look like, but just to give you an idea what's all possible. Which brings me to my conclusions. I hope I convinced you that a fundamental new approach to urban development is needed for the challenges of the 21st century. I'm quite convinced that, banning light bulbs, being a little bit more efficient, buying some eco gadgets, it's not of course, we all need to do that, but it's not going to help. It's not going to help enough. We really need big challenges, require big solutions. And what I tried to present today was a big vision, a fundamental new approach. And I think there are two things that need to happen. First, cities on the land should be transformed into flood-proof eco-cities. I realized that I didn't say so much about that today because of the time. But in the book that you all can take a copy of when you leave, there's one chapter also about what we can do on the land with cities, because both are important. The cities on the land need to be transformed into flood-proof eco-cities. I described many building blocks to do that. But the floating city expansions should be partly realized on the water. And combined with food production, they can accommodate future urbanization without sacrificing land. At the same time, this strategy provides global food security and reuses the waste of conventional cities. I also show that still much research needs to be done, clearly. But also, this research should not be an excuse not to do anything, because the urgency is quite large. So what we need to do is to implement and do research at the same time. And that's exactly what we try to do here at the RDM campus. So we need to learn. Of course, we should not build an entire floating city of 1 million people tomorrow. What we need to do is to start small scale and scale it up, learn, and gradually grow to floating neighborhoods, floating districts, and in the end, floating cities. And we're working already on pilot projects for the Blue Revolution, already here in the port of Rotterdam. We're already forming consortia, people that are interested to work on it. So that's all happening. So if you feel fascinated or inspired, or even if you're a little bit critical but still think it's interesting to work on it, I would say join the Blue Revolution. And because really we need all the knowledge and creativity we can get to make this happen. And it might sound like a big vision, but I think vision is very necessary in the time we live in now. And only the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. Thank you.